Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back to the Share Your Story podcast. I'm your host, Ellie B. I hope your 2024 is starting off well. I have sadly been in bed with a bug, so I apologize that this episode is up later than usual. Today on the show, I'm excited to share part one of my conversation with my Aunt Laura. Laura, or Lala, as so many of us like to call her, is the youngest of my mom's three siblings, wife to Craig, mom to Madeline, Emma, and their sweet dog Weezie, and owner of Laura Meeks Interior Design. This episode is full of funny stories of growing up as the youngest of four and raising two girls at the same time as my mom. But you'll also hear so much about Laura's journey with the Lord and walking out her faith through the various seasons of life. I've really learned so much throughout this episode, and I know you will too. So without further ado, here's part one of my conversation with my Aunt Laura. Okay, Lala. Aunt Laura.
Yes.
Scuzz, Buzz. I feel like you have so many nicknames.
I really do. And some of them are so bizarre.
Yeah. What's your favorite one?
Lala.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that started from Nor Jane?
Well, it actually started from one of my dad's best friends called me that as a child. And I loved it. And he would say, "Hey, Lala." And I loved it. He was the only one that ever called me Lala. But so it stayed with me. And so then when Nora Jane needed something to call me, I was like, "How about Lala?"
I did not realize that's where it came from.
Dr. Trotter.
Oh, Dr. Trotter?
Dr. Trotter.
Oh my
Who is
gosh.
like one of my favorite friend of my dad's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's
He would call me
sweet.
Lala. He only ever called me Lala. My grandmother called me Lollipop. I loved that. She never said my name. I was Lollipop. My dad only called me Lolita. Loved that. Never said Laura. Ever.
And Laura's such a simple name in the sense that it doesn't necessarily require a nickname. Like Mary Claire is two full names, which you would think. But you have so many pretty ones.
So many nicknames.
Ellie is not as fun because kids rhyme it with jelly and belly and they're not as flattering as lollipop.
Yes. The L's, make it easy, I think.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Well, it's so funny because growing up, I think I was always under the impression that I was so my mom, that I had like my mom and I were like carbon copies of each other. And in some ways we very much are, because we used to call each other two bodies, one brain, because I think we process and think a lot of things alike. But growing up, I think I realized how much of like elements of you that I had that I didn't fully understand when I was little. Like, we love an outfit, we love to host and be the center of attention, and all those fun little things that my mom never understood. And I think as sibling dynamics too, that was something for y'all that you complemented each other really well because you didn't get the other side. And I just remember my mom always asking you questions of like, I don't know how to put an outfit together. How am I going to do this?
Well, it's funny because my dad was the fashionista.
Really?
Oh, he was such a clothes horse and had so much style. And he would say, "Well, Lolita, I got voted best dressed again at the hospital." It was very much his thing. And he would go on, trips and bring home like beautiful outfits for all of us. Like, wow, what dad is good at that? Like 4 children, and he would bring back like beautiful outfits.
I don't think I ever knew that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, to be voted best dressed at the hospital when you're a surgeon, he must have really been walking in with something
many years in a row
before changing into scrubs.
I think he secretly ran for it every year.
You have to make quite the impression though, because aren't you in scrubs most of the time?
Yeah.
So his little walk in, walk out.
The rounds.
During rounds. So true. During rounds.
Yeah. And he, I said, "Daddy, who votes?" He was like, "The nurses."
Makes the most sense. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How cute.
Total fashionista. He had more shoes than my mom.
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so what was it like growing up being the youngest of 4?
The best. Love my position. Wouldn't trade it. Of course, I think to the to the older three, I was the rotten one, the brat, daddy's favorite. Very obvious. Knew that, loved it, owned it, you know.
I feel like that's a younger sibling
Yeah.
trait.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I was the kind of the thorn in my mom's side as a young child, because my dad would come home and she'd say, "You don't understand how bad she was." And he'd say, "Oh, no, she's just a baby." And he would excuse every bad thing about me. And one day he came home and I didn't know he was home, and I was evidently throwing a royal tantrum, and he watched the whole thing. I think
Popped.
yeah, bubble. I think his jaw was to the floor. But I have a dear friend that much later in life, when I was going through prayer ministry, and the guy doing the prayer ministry said, "So you think you're special?" And I was like, there was something so deep in me that is so special, because my dad treated me like I was so special. I mean, that thing had to be
Gosh. No, but it's
taken out.
yes. Well, and that's the purpose of sanctification. We go through it, but that's also a really sweet thing, because a lot of people growing up don't think they're special in any which way. And there is something to that kind of confidence that allows you to walk through life that way. That's
Well,
hysterical.
I'll never forget it, because I remember telling your mom that when he said it to me, I felt like I was in a glass bubble, and he took a hammer and just went and shattered it. And I was like, I mean, I think I walked around for days thinking, I'm not special. Like, I'm just like, I had a little special complex.
Oh
Like,
my
in a way,
gosh.
I don't know how to explain it, but it was
Yeah.
something my dad made me,
Yeah.
feel like.
That the popping of the glass or the hammering of the glass feels
Yeah,
like a very Pixar
it
movie.
shattered me.
Oh
Yeah,
my gosh. Yeah,
yeah.
it would.
But then, as the Lord would, it's like I had to understand that kind of special is not of the Lord.
Yeah.
But then he redeemed it and made me very much understand that I am I am special.
Right.
All his children are special,
Right.
and we are special because we are his. So he redeemed it in the most beautiful way, but it was process.
Oh, I think about that all the time, because my biggest thing was I grew up, especially as a dancer, like wanting to be front and center on the stage. And I always used to tell my mom, like, I'm going to be famous. I'm going to be famous, and thought it was going to be all these grand ways. And it was through her being like, there's something that the Lord has there for you, that maybe like you'll have some sort of platform, whatever that means and whatever that
Right.
looks like, whether that's just even
Yeah.
in your individual life. But for me, I thought it was like, no, I'm supposed to be in the center stage, and that had to be redeemed. But the
Yeah.
quality had to be
Yeah.
there in order for your calling to come through. Like
Right.
it's not that the specialness or the I'm gonna be famous is completely wrong. Like he's the one who planted it there. It
Right.
just has to be pruned.
Yeah. And I'm not that kind of center. I can't stand to be on
Right.
stage, perform. I will
Yeah.
not karaoke. I'm not the person to get up on stage.
Yeah.
There's many funny
Yeah.
stories of me having a solo and I literally just stared. No words came out of my mouth. So I don't like that kind of attention,
Yeah.
but I love the attention from my loved ones. It's more
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Like like I like to be the center when I'm with my people.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. I totally
That had
get
to be sanctified.
Yeah. No kidding.
To burst it all.
No kidding.
All the
Doesn't
bubbles.
all of them. All of them. I feel like as growing up though, and still now, y'all as siblings are so, so close, and you don't always find that. Why do you think y'all stayed so close? Or what was it when y'all were younger that you think bonded y'all so closely?
So I would say we had I feel like we had a unique situation with my father being foreign. He was from a Colombian community.
Yeah.
And they were all the families that we did things with, both parents were Colombian. So the kids
Right.
were very Colombian. And then my mom being Southern,
Right.
it was just kind of we always knew that my parents were like Ricky and Lucy. Like there was something special about it.
Mm.
So then here we were the only four like that didn't speak fluent Spanish. We didn't,
Right.
and Jane, your mom,
Yeah.
was always in denial that she was
Always.
Hispanic in any form or fashion. And we had lots of, my dad was a little bit of a Captain Von Trapp
Mm.
in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And we had, he would, in the summers, he didn't like that we would sleep late. So he would get us up 6 a.m., the four of us, to do calisthenics, and he would time everything. And Richard and I thought it was the most fun. And then he'd leave for the hospital and we'd go back to sleep. And I would tell people that story because I thought it was so funny. And
Yeah.
Jane was like, "Don't tell people that. It's so weird." I'm like, "It's not weird. It's hysterical." And she's like, "No, it's not." But anyway, I just think we were an unusual, maybe, family
Yeah.
because of the dynamics. And then my parents, didn't have a healthy marriage, did not have a
Mm.
good marriage. It was a very dysfunctional marriage. So I think that brought the four of us closer to kind of cling to each other because of the instability.
Yeah.
But we were always, my parents were very good they were very loving parents.
Right.
So we felt very loved by our parents.
Right.
So we knew how to be loving because they were very loving.
Mm-hmm.
They just weren't loving to each other necessarily.
Yeah.
So it just a strange dynamic. But when it was good, it was good. When it was good, I felt like the Brady Bunch. But when it was bad, it was so bad. And I think those traumatic experiences, they either break you apart or they make you stronger. And I think it really made the four of us strong.
Yeah.
Because we are exceptionally close. And I don't think I thought that was any different than any other family until I got older.
Right.
And I'm still that close to every single one of them. And Jane and I being inseparable,
Right.
People would say, I love how close you are to how close you and Jane are, or how close you are to your brother, or how close you are to your sisters. And I remember thinking, isn't everybody? Like I just didn't know anything differently,
Exactly. I think that was similar to, now people have probably heard our episode with Madeline and Emma, how we were like, cousins go to school with each other. Like, what do you mean? Like, we didn't think.
Hey, I need to set the record straight. Jane and I did not come up with that idea. It was presented to us by the children, and we went with it. We did not say, let's send them to school with them so we can shop.
So it was genius on all sides. Genius on all sides. Collaboration. I like that. But it was so true for us too. Like, I don't think we knew that people didn't always, like, I think all of our vacations together, we thought spring break is when we go to Naples and we go hang out with Ruthie and Poncho and Annalise and Lauren and Alex. When we go to Atlanta and have a fun time, we're always going to see Richard, and maybe like y'all will come in town from Athens. Like, it was always almost on a calendar. We did everything together, and it never seemed, I similar to you. I feel like when I would tell friends and whatnot in elementary, middle school, any of that stuff, I never knew that that's not what everybody did.
Right. Like, we lived to be with our cousins.
Yeah.
Or y'all lived to be with your cousins, and we lived to be with our siblings. And if I ever wanted, I remember saying, well, if I ever travel, I mean, that's who I want to travel with. It just never dawned on me to do spring break without y'all, or to do.
Right. And now that you even say that out loud, I think it kind of clicks even more of our assumption was always that we're going to do things together. Like, I think we never had an idea of like, we're going on this trip. It was like, well, which are we switching off with? Like, which family, or is there going to be a way to do it all together?
Yeah.
Even for holidays, any time off, any of that.
Yeah. And Craig and Stuart just had to go with it. And Poncho.
What's new?
It's just the way it is.
At least there was usually golf involved for them. That helped at each location.
Craig trying to fathom Jane and I's need to talk every day, all day, be together every chance we could. We would sit there, and this is back when you paid long distance for your phone calls.
Yeah.
And Jane and I would sit there on the phone and watch like 5 episodes of Bewitched together on the phone. And they would get the bill, and we would be I'd be like, I'm not going to be able to talk tomorrow. Greg's so mad at me. And she'd be like, I know, Stuart is so mad at me. And then we'd talk for an hour. Oh my God, it's the best day in our lives when that long distance thing went away. We were like, yes.
That is so funny because it was always, again, second nature that we knew y'all would be on the phone 4 hours, and it's not that it stopped everything, like, y'all didn't even when we were little, y'all didn't just sit somewhere and be on the phone, like, it
No.
was almost just an extension of whatever's going on, like,
Yeah.
my mom was still making lunches or
Yeah.
we're running around with
Yeah.
errands, but we just know what's going
Yeah.
on the phone at all the time.
My favorite is Jane and I. You and Madeline, when you were little, like 3, were so into Barney.
Oh,
And so we
yeah.
would stay on the phone while y'all watched Barney, and we would be like, "Oh my gosh, that Julie is so on my nerves today." And we sit there and talk about the children that were on there. Oh my gosh, that's
It's
so
such a
funny.
fun way to do life together when you don't live, because y'all are 6 hours away.
Exactly, exactly. It's brutal. We used to pray all the time that God would work it out so we could live in the same town and
Yeah.
be neighbors and be together. And we finally, like, I don't know, 10 years into being moms with realizing it was never going to happen, we were like, I think it's because when we're together, we literally have no need for other people.
Mm,
Like, we don't need our
right.
husbands, we don't need our friends, we don't need our children. We like being together,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it was a big no. That's not going to be the
Mhm.
best thing for you two to live in the same town.
That well, what was it like? Because y'all, I mean, had girls almost back to back to back of each other, but first it was like my mom, I know, was married earlier because she was older than you by 3 years? 3 years, right?
Oh, older than me by,
Yeah.
yes, 3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then she had been trying to have kids for a long time, and that's a whole
Yeah.
other story. Um, and
But
then
that's
y'all
my testimony, that's how my eyes got open to the Lord
was through that?
was through your mom's ability because, um, she tried for, I think, like 7 years,
Yeah.
didn't they?
Mhm.
And Craig and I had been married 2 years and actually mentioned, "Maybe we're ready to try," and bam.
Yeah.
And I was we were here, we were in Jacksonville visiting, and I was with your mom, and she was like, I think you might need to take a pregnancy test."
Really?
And, so she was with me, and it was positive, and she said her heart just broke,
Yeah.
and she said she heard the Lord because she was walking so closely with the Lord at this point. She said she heard him say, "Choose joy,
Mm.
choose joy."
Yeah.
And so it was like she was at a crossroads, and she was so precious and so excited for me,
Mm.
um, and then she, was having such a hard time getting pregnant. It really looked quite impossible, and I remember she kept saying, "Well, we're praying about it," and I was like, "Praying?" And I'd call Ruthie, and she'd be like, "I mean, what are they gonna do?" And I'm like, "They're praying." Like, and Ruth was like, "That's it?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Like, "What is that?" We were and they went to some church service.
Yeah.
Your mom has a whole story, that's another
Yeah.
story, but
Yeah.
about how they said her, "If y'all are ready to get pregnant, we're about to pray, and it'll happen." And I remember Jane calling me, and I was 4 months pregnant,
Yeah.
and she called me and said, "I'm pregnant." And I was like, I fell into the chair, like, "What?" And what a gift. We
Especially
had girls together, and
yeah.
we had second girls together,
Yeah.
and at that point, I really was like, wow, because, you know, Pancho being a OBGYN and knowing
Yeah.
what the conditions were, he's like, I mean, it would take a miracle for
Yeah.
them to have a baby,
And that's what they were told.
and
Yeah.
that's what they told. And so we had y'all together, got 2
Yeah.
girls, we're raising them, and then at that point, I was on a journey with the Lord, and I was learning so much about Him and about prayer and the power of prayer and how near He is and how intimate it all is, and
Yeah.
I'll never forget 2 years later, Jane's like, "I really want another baby, but
Yeah.
I feel like the Lord's going, 'I gave you one. Be happy.'"
Mhm.
And I was like, "Well, that doesn't sound like the Lord you keep telling me about." I literally said that to her. I'm like,
Yeah.
"That doesn't sound like the God you've told me about. I
Mm,
mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting more children."
right.
And she was like, "Really?" And I was like, "Well, if everything you've told me about him is true, then why would you think that?" And she was like,
Mm,
"Okay." And so the prayers
wow.
started, and there came Mary Claire,
Right.
and it
Well,
was
even
such
going
a
back,
gift.
it's crazy the way that God uses other people to help us through because, you say like they were trying for 7 years, and that's, me sitting across from you. I am that person that came out of, like, that prayer, which is so
Yeah,
crazy. But the 7 years is a long time. 7 years where you walked along your sister of her saying, "I can't have kids,"
mhm,
and they had bad news after bad news because it was like both of them were gonna be
right.
completely incapable, and I'm pretty sure they did IVF once?
No,
They
they never
didn't?
did.
Okay,
No,
okay, okay.
they never
Maybe
did.
maybe they were told to try it and said no, but it's like
Yeah, they were told that, which they couldn't afford. It was, like,
yes.
crazy expensive,
Yeah,
and everybody kept telling her mom to adopt,
yeah,
and she was like, "If one more person tells me I need to adopt, maybe I'm meant to adopt." And she said, "It makes me feel like a horrible person. I think it's wonderful
right.
to adopt." She's like, "I want my own child. I want
Yeah,
my own child." And then she
right.
had a spiritual mentor that said, "Jane, have you asked the Lord for a sign?" And she was like, "Can I do that?" And she was like, "Of course you can." And she said, "Ask him if you're meant to have your own child to give you a sign."
Right,
She's like, "He'll
right,
answer you." And
right.
so she prayed and had a dream, and all she could see was a baby in the womb, and she's
Mhm.
staring at it, and she just kept thinking, "Is it mine? Is it
Right.
mine?" And then she heard
Yeah.
the Lord say, "It's yours."
Wow.
So she knew. She
Right.
knew she'd have one, which
Right.
built her faith up, and then
Right. Because that's 7 years is, again, such a long time,
it's a
like,
long
7 weeks is a long time, 7 months is a long time, 7 years,
yeah,
but to see, that's just the way he works in perspective where now you're like, "Well, it's because we had babies 4 months apart, and our lives would look so different if Madeline and I weren't 4 months apart."
right. If
And
y'all
it
were 5
also
years apart or
Yeah, and it's also that cemented y'all's bond of walking with that together, and that was what increased your faith, and, it's like that stuff that feels which I know I'll be swallowing some of my own words a few years from now, but it's that stuff that feels so unkind that he would make her wait 7 years or that he would but it was part of the journey, not just for her story, but for yours,
right.
if that's how you met Jesus, you know?
Exactly. It's how she met him,
Yeah,
then it's how I met him,
right.
and then it's like I'll never forget, she was like she kept trying to tell me to get in a Bible study. I was like, "Yeah, I'm not there yet." Um, and then I moved to Athens. I wanted to move to Athens.
Mm.
We fell in love with the house, and I remember, like, laying in bed, and I was like, "All right, Lord, I'll make a deal with you. I'll join a Bible study if you'll let us move to Athens, get this
Mm.
house." And,
Yeah.
I think I'd been to Athens. I think I'd lived in Athens, like, 2 weeks, and I got invited to a baby shower, and I think I'd been at the baby shower 2 minutes, and this dear friend, right, now, I didn't know her at the
Yeah.
time, introduced herself, and she's like, it's, bring a friend to Bible study week. I would love for you to join me." And I'll never forget, I felt like there was a spotlight on my head from the heavens, and I was like, "Uh, okay." And I literally said to him in my head, "Wow, that was fast." Like, "I forgot I made a deal with you. You're really gonna hold me to it."
One
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I love and, admire and learn so much from is your honest relationship with the Lord because I feel like y'all have such a rapport, like, if that makes sense, and I don't know if part of it is, like, we love movies so much and we love to quote TV shows and all that kinda stuff, but isn't it you who used to always do this? Like, you were think you were watching a
Oh, yeah.
speech bubble,
I
like, you
still do. I
Yeah,
think that I'm bored with their conversation when they're talking
yeah,
to me because I'm so visual, like, when they're talking, I have to look up and
you tilt your h
visualize it,
yeah,
but they think I'm uninterested in what they're saying.
Yeah, you, like, tilt your head
Yeah.
and your eyes go up almost as if there's a speech bubble coming out of your head and you're watching stuff play out,
Yeah.
and I feel like I
Yeah.
remember, because 'cause I'm an observant person,
Yeah.
I feel like I remember saying that to you
Yeah.
in White Ways one time when we were little, I was like, "It's like you're looking at something." You're like, "'Cause there's like a bubble here."
And I really think I probably offend people to this day. They think I'm not listening or like bored, but I'm not only am I listening, but I'm focusing and trying to get the image of what they're saying.
Yeah, I love it.
And they'll be like, "Well, it's nice talking to you. Bye." 'Cause I've offended them. Like,
Yeah.
I was really trying to
Y
imagine it.
Right, really get in it, like, listen even more intently. But how do you feel like that relationship with the Lord developed? Because I feel like you really are like, even that and that's just how He works, but the timeline even of seeing, like, "Oh, you moved into this house, and 2 weeks later, it's like, invite a friend to Bible stu" it could not be more
Oh,
obvious.
and that's how my journey was with him. Like,
Mhm.
Jane would say, "You have got to write these things down," because
Yeah,
she was so blown away at what my journey looked like once I let him in, once I
yeah,
opened that door. So, I go to Bible study with this new friend.
yeah.
I mean, like, a week later, I was like, "Oh my god." Like, I don't even think I did own a Bible because Jane gave me one. And I always believed in God. I just didn't I just had 0 understanding
Yeah,
and never really read the Bible.
right.
So, I have a Bible because Jane gave me one. She was teaching me. I was learning, but I was just this was like, "Okay." Eh,
Uh-huh.
um, so I go to this Bible study. We drove 45 minutes. It's nothing but women in Bibles, Bibles in their hand. Big Coliseum church, never been in anything like that.
Mhm.
Sat down, we were, like, on the front row. I was like, "Really?" So I'm sitting there with my friend, and all of a sudden, I'm like I start to panic, and I'm like, "Uh, I don't know anything." Like, I don't even know I don't know anything about the Bible. Like, I'm about to
Right.
be so
And you feel like you have to show up with
embarrassed.
something because it
Yeah,
feels almost
and
intimidating.
yeah, so intimidated.
Yeah.
And, this person gets up to speak, and she's like, "Welcome to BSF, and we're gonna start." She's like, "This year, we are doing Genesis, the very first chapter of the Bible. So let's open up to chapter 1, page 1, verse 1 of chapter 1." And I remember feeling like like the Lord I could feel him smiling at me. Like, and I thought, "Oh," you know, and
Reminds me of Sound of Music. Let's start from the very
yeah,
beginning, the very first place to start.
and and my entire journey with him looks like that. Like,
Yeah.
I truly he I walk not any part of my own, but I feel like that's just what it looks like, to the point where I got so spoiled by that goodness and that
Yeah.
relationship. And I remember Jane would say, when the Lord's drawing you, he woos you. And I was so wooed. I was so
Yeah.
consumed because I
Right.
couldn't believe. I mean, I could tell you some really funny little stories, and
Yeah.
I should share a few just because it's
Yeah.
hysterical, and
Yeah.
it explains why my journey got so fast and furious, as
Mm.
I would say.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember at one point, a couple of years into my relationship and my walk with the Lord and my prayer life, I was frustrated, and your mom goes, "He's not a fairy godmother." Because I had gotten kinda rotten with my expectations.
You're like, we make deals all the time. I sign on the dotted line.
Yes,
I got
I'm
a
like,
house,
"Well,
I go to Bible study, we
pretty much got everything I want."
and
Um,
it's also so that special place, like
uh,
your dad,
I mean,
you're the special one.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, oh, the stories I could tell you that
Yeah.
feed that. And so that's why fast forward 5 years and I'm in healing ministry, he's like, "You think you're special?" He's like, "You're not special."
You're like,
I was
"No,
like,
but yes, I am."
I'm sorry? I don't think you know me." Daddy says I'm special, and dad says I'm special. My goodness. I think Jane asked me one time, she goes, "What is your testimony?" It was years later, and I said, I think I didn't understand how much of a fearful person I was."
Mm,
I had a lot of fear, like, in a big way, like,
yeah,
just vulnerable in a big, dark world
yeah,
feeling, and
yeah,
Jane told me how personal and loving and faithful God is. And then I quickly started to experience it myself.
Right.
I said, I think, there's a scripture in the Bible that says, the faith of a child.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I was like, oh. And so I have the faith of a child, like a child, that when a child believes in Santa Claus, you just believe.
Right.
And so there was nothing that I didn't take to him, talk to him about, expect from him, ask of him. And he just kept blowing my mind, even with the tiniest prayers. I mean, tiny little prayers. And I remember 20 years later teaching Sunday school and trying to explain that wanting the youth to understand, like, there's nothing you can't pray about. In fact, when you pray about every little thing and you see his faithfulness in every little thing, when the big things come, you're so prepared because you have no reason not to trust him. And I remember one time I was very disappointed in something that the Lord had worked out for me, and then it kind of fell apart at the last minute. And I remember telling Jane, like, I don't know why he would do that. And she said, well, it got canceled because somebody else had something really dire. So you got put on the back burner. And I said, but I so desperately needed it. And she said, but someone's life was in danger. It's hard to explain. But she's like, don't you think if your life was in danger, he would have made sure it happened. Anyway,
Right.
I'm not saying it right.
No.
But, then it became a new level of trust and faith when it doesn't turn out exactly like I expected it to, because I went for years where he literally answered every single tiny little prayer exactly like I hoped.
Really?
So then
the next tell me some of those.
Journey, oh my heavens. So let's see. Oh, I had one a minute ago and I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell that. And it left me for a minute. But I remember I used to lose things all the time. And it still drives quite crazy.
Yeah.
And I would lose my car keys all the time. And one day I couldn't find my car keys, and Craig's like, where are your keys? And I was like, I don't know. I can't find them. And he was like, oh. And so he'd ask like every hour on the hour, did you find your keys? Did you find your keys? And I'm like, no. And I remember saying, okay, Lord, where are my keys? You know where my keys are. So I need you to show me where my keys are. I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
And still didn't find them. A day went by, still didn't find them. And every time Craig would ask, I'd say, Jesus, where are my keys? You have to show me where my keys are. Like, you can see them with your eyes. I can't see them with my eyes. Show me where the keys are. And so 3 days went by. And Craig is like, find your keys yet? Because back then it was such an ordeal if you only had one set.
No kidding.
So I was like, no. And so that was like the third day, and it was pouring rain. And Craig and I have been driving around Athens kind of looking for a house for his sister. So we've done a lot of driving. And we were pulling up the stop sign, and I thought to myself, he's going to ask me. He's going to ask me if I found my keys. Lord, do something. And all of a sudden, we're pulling up at a stop sign, and all of a sudden, the Lord puts a memory in my head of me having the girls in the driveway because they wanted to ride their scooter, and I had my keys in my hand, and I set them on the roof of my car. Like in a flash, that memory came to me, and Craig pulls up at the stop sign, and he goes, did you find your keys? And it's pouring rain, and it had been pouring rain for like 3 days.
Yeah.
And I didn't answer him. I opened the car door. I stepped on the footboard.
Yeah.
And I lifted up, and my keys, not only were they on the roof of my car, but they were at the edge with 2 keys hanging over the windshield, and the key fob like on the roof.
Oh.
In the pouring rain for 3 days, and we've been driving around. And my eyes popped out of my head. I grabbed my keys. I got in the car and I go, yep, I found them. And I had another time I lost my keys and I had to be somewhere. And I said, Lord, where are my keys? Where are my keys? And I had looked for an hour and I was going to be late for something important and maybe picking the kids up. I can't remember. And
Yeah.
I said, I need you to tell me. And I kept hearing in the chest, in the chest. And I was like, I don't put keys in the chest. Like I kept ignoring it.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, where are my keys? I need you to tell me right now. And I
Yeah.
kept hearing in the chest. And I was like, I don't put keys in the chest. So finally I went and opened this chest where we used to keep spare keys and
Uh-huh.
tools and things like that. And I'm looking, I'm like, there's no keys. There's no keys. And I see this weird Volvo key because I had a Volvo,
Yeah.
but it was like a plastic thing. And I was like, what is that? And it was a spare that Volvo gave you in case
Right.
you couldn't get into your car.
Mhm.
So I was like, So I took it and I opened my car and my keys were in my.
Inside
So
the
he
car.
showed me where the spare was
Yes.
to go get my keys out of it. I mean, like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. No kidding. But it's like it's that close relationship with him that even when you were ignoring him, I think sometimes I'm so guilty of being like, well, you're not giving me the exact right answer that is giving me the solve to the problem. But it's like he's like, "No, no, no. I'm still talking to you. I'm still giving you the problem. You just got to walk with me. You got to work with me here a little bit."
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's so true
Yeah. It's so
that
fun.
I really could write a book on just the faithfulness in the tiniest little
Yeah.
things.
So when you kind of talked about it a little bit, but when did that kind of shift for you of like he's not the fairy godmother?
So, of course, your mom,
Yeah.
who was leading me, would say, I started, like Madeline started to drive and she got in a wreck. And I had literally asked the Lord to protect her and command his angels concerning her. She was a new driver. She had Emma in the car. I was, and
Yeah.
they turned the corner and they get wrecked. And I was so upset with him. I was like, I prayed specifically
Mm.
and I was so upset. And Jane was like, I was so mad at him.
Yeah.
And she was like, but they're okay. He did protect him. And I'm like, well, they got in a wreck. She goes, but they're okay. And she's like,
Yeah.
Laura, life isn't going to be perfect. We're in a fallen
Mm.
world. Bad things are going to happen.
Yeah.
She's like, but did you protect your children in it? Yes.
Mm.
And so I remember thinking, but I don't like that because that rocks my whole belief that I ask, he gives. And so
Right.
then I had to go through this whole next season of going through trial and suffering, going through
Yeah.
disappointments, going through hard times and in various things and seeing him in that, seeing his
Yeah.
faithfulness in his goodness in things when they're not going well and they
Right.
didn't go the way you wanted them to, or
Mm.
you've been betrayed by somebody and
Yeah.
that you trusted, or, all of, that next 10 years was rich learning ground, but
Isn't
clearly, little special one had to learn that he's not a very godfather.
isn't that his kindness too that even you saying like your biggest thing was fear around like big, dark, dangerous world. So first he showed you, no, I am kind and I can give you all these things, which gave you the faith to like, okay, well then I guess I need to figure you out when the danger still does come.
Exactly, which is
Yeah.
always how he works,
Yeah.
He knows each person and how to get you there, and he
Yeah.
knew with me, it was like a little girl with her daddy seeing, "Oh, he takes such good care of me.
Mm,
Why would I ever be afraid?"
yeah.
And then once that child grows up a little, matures a little, it's like, "Okay, but it's not always gonna be perfect. Life is not
Mhm.
life this side of heaven is
Yeah.
hard
Right.
and different and broken and falling and,
Yeah.
you know." So,
Our pastor, Joby, has a prayer that he says, he prays a lot over our congregation, which is bless them or break them, whatever brings them to you. And it's always so unique. And are yours is such an example of like, even just like you said, those tiny little blessings of finding your keys when you feel forgetful or all those things that he was blessing you along the way that brought you to him. So then walking out those next seasons of life, you were already so close to him. Yeah.
Yeah. It um and I think it also, Jane would help me see, like, she was like, when you don't understand something, your first reaction is anger
Mm.
towards God.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, as soon as she said it, I was like, yeah, you're right. And being so ashamed
Mm.
of that. And she was like, no, 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 he can handle your anger. She's like, it's
Yeah.
just honest. She's like, he'd rather, and she'd always say, you, it doesn't do any good to hide your feelings from God because he already knows they're there.
Yeah.
So she's like, when you're angry with God, she said, you're being honest.
Mm.
And I have a dear friend that would always be like, oh, you make me so nervous when you get mad at God. And I'm like, well, he can handle my anger. He knows me, you know. and now I don't really, now I'm in a different, even deeper walk with
Right.
him, and that's not my reaction at all,
Right.
ever.
Yeah.
But I remember having a friend lose her husband and son in a car accident, and she's a very strong believer.
Yeah.
Her son was Madeline's age, and she lost her husband in a car accident on the way home from vacation. And I remember I couldn't wait to find out if she was mad at God. Like, that was my first question. And I ran into one of our mutual friends, and I said, is she so mad at God? And she looked at me like so perplexed, and she goes, no, honey, she's not mad at God. And I was like, really? Because all I could think of
Wow.
was, I would be.
Right. Definitely.
And so literally that was a pivotal point for me where the Lord took me
Wow.
to a new teaching season
Yeah.
of learning how to not see the fallen and broken world as his fault.
Mm.
It's our fault.
Right.
We did this.
Right.
We created this mess. He's the only good thing
Yeah.
in it. And when you really understand that, your mom getting cancer, your mom being taken at 56 years old,
Right.
there is no anger with God. There's only, oh, Lord, thank you that you made a way for her to live her best life now with
Yeah.
you,
And be
healed,
home.
whole.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
that's what it's all about is,
Mm.
so it was quite the process, but he got me there
Mm. Yeah.
because I used to always blame him when things were. And now I have such a heart for people that think it's him doing the
Yeah.
mean, doing the bad,
Right.
doing the ugly.
Yeah.
Because I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
You don't know until you get to know him, and then you're like,
We've had a lot of those
wow,
conversations.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
I know. And that's a big part of both you and I's story, our own stories, but also our testimonies, I would say, is my mom getting sick. And I think neither of us thought that would ever be a part of the story whatsoever.
Her story especially,
Her story
because she was so
especially.
faithful and
Exactly.
surrendered, and
Gosh, isn't she just amazing? And this is only part one. We rarely get to sit down and revisit so many of these subjects and parts of our stories in such detail, so this was such a special treat. Please make sure you come back on Tuesday for part 2. You really don't want to miss it. Also, please feel free to support Laura and her business on Instagram. Her accounts, as well as the shows, are in the show notes of this episode. I'd love for you to share this show with someone who you think would love this conversation, and please rate and review it wherever you listen. This helps the podcast get in front of new listeners. Thank you again for your patience with me today. I cannot wait to see you back here next week.